One time, I was walking home from the train station after I spent the weekend at my aunt's house. It was about 11 p.m. at night and very dark outside. When I was almost home, I noticed a guy on crutches in front of me who walked the same direction and then stopped every couple meters to turn around and look at me before continuing to walk on. Since he was walking with a limp, I quickly passed him. When I did, he stopped walking and grinned at me in a very creepy way. I kept moving. Since I lived in an apartment complex over a burger restaurant, for a moment I considered to ask one of the employees to walk me to the front door, because to get to the entrance of the apartment part of the house, you had to walk around the house into a dark court. Finally, I didn't ask, because I thought, what could possibly happen? This guy is on crutches, and I didn't want to come across childish. So, I was walking through the court of our house and wanted to pull out my keys while walking. Suddenly, I couldn't find them in my handbag. I realized I had thrown them somewhere in my travel bag because I didn't want to lose them from my handbag while staying at my aunt's and being out over with her all the time. So, still standing in the middle of the court, I had to search the whole travel bag for that damn key. I was so distracted by the whole key searching incident that I totally forgot about the creepy guy I had encountered before. When I finally pulled the key out of the bag, I looked up and the creepy guy from before was standing right in front of me, grinning. I always thought in a situation like this that I'd start screaming, but instead, I couldn't get myself to make any sound at all. With the keys in my hand, I started running to the front door, opened it, and jumped inside the house. The guy, still walking with a limp, followed me as fast as he could. Luckily, due to his injury, he wasn't as fast as me. Unfortunately for me, our front door was one of those doors that slowly fall into the lock automatically, but when you try to push them in order to shut them quicker, it pressures back and stops you from slamming it. So there I was, trying to push the door into the lock, while creepy guy was on his way to follow me into the house. Believe it or not, the door fell into the lock right in the second he reached the doorstep. Through the glass door, we just looked at each other, both breathing heavily from the race. He looked quite disappointed. I quickly ran upstairs to my apartment and locked myself in it. Later that night, I looked outside my window and I saw the same man walking up and down the road in front of the house. He stayed there for about 3 or 4 hours after the incident. I can't tell you what it was that made me not call the cops. I guess I was like, after all, nothing happened. What can they do about it? After that, I didn't feel safe in my home anymore because I knew that he knew where I lived. I only left my apartment when being packed up or dropped off and made sure to be home before it was turning dark every day for 2 weeks. Finally, I decided to go to the police and tell them about it to ask whether they can keep a special eye on the neighborhood for a bit. I went to the police station, and it happened exactly what I feared. They took notes and said, we can't really do anything about it now. You should have called before, but we'll make a note. A couple days passed, and suddenly I get a call from another police officer who asked me a lot about what happened. He then tells me that they've been looking for the guy on crutches for months already, because he molested several girls in our town, followed them into their apartments, and even slept in front of their doors. He had been in police custody before, but got out and violated probation. He had some kind of mental illness, too. The police officer told me to immediately call in case the guy showed up again. Luckily, he never did. It was only then that I understood the seriousness of the situation and realized that I most likely escaped an attempted assault in some sort of way by just an inch. I, in a way, really didn't believe myself that the whole thing had actually happened, before the police guy called me back anyway. This was 5 years ago, but I still think about it from time to time, and it still gives me the creeps. Hey, creepy guy, let's never meet again. So this only happened yesterday, and it's been driving me crazy. It's not as wild as other stories on here, but it's by far one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me. So, my husband and I are walking home from having a beer at a local pub around 6 p.m. In terms of setting the scene, We live in a small New Zealand town, population approximately 2,000, that's filled with a real mixed bag in terms of residents. Older folk, meth heads, low income, but increasingly commuters from our capital city have been settling here. We fall into the latter category. It's spring here, so it was still plenty light and we're just chatting as we walk the 10 minutes or so home. About 3 minutes into the walk, at the first intersection on our walk, I spot a cat sitting on a fence of one of the corner houses on the other side of the street from us. I say meow, and it meows back. It then starts stalking a bird, so my husband and I continue watching this house, the cat really, as we walk past. Suddenly, a person with a brown paper bag mask on their head kind of stumbles out of the front door of this house into the yard. Their mannerisms and how they're moving are so strange, but not what I'd associate with being drunk. The house itself seems completely dead, so there's no party on it or anything. The person then turns to us and makes eye contact. Well, the eye holes in the mask are staring at us, and they slowly start backing away to the front door alcove of the house and disappear from view into the alcove. We've been slowly walking this whole time, and at this point I have literal goosebumps and an intense sense of dread. When I write it down, it sounds so silly, but there was something so creepy about this person. We're still looking as we walk past the house, and the paper bag face slowly emerges from the alcove, watching us before disappearing from view again. As we walk and get further and further away, we keep turning around to look, and the same happens over and over again. Nothing, and then slowly but surely the paper bag face emerges out to watch us. This continued until we were at the end of the street, some 350 meters, and rounded the corner out of sight. It still makes my skin crawl thinking about it. My husband laughed and said it was probably some kid getting ready for Halloween or fucking with us, and he's probably right, but I had to keep turning around to watch my back for the rest of the walk home because I was so creeped out. This may be long, but honestly I'm looking for some answers. So I've pushed this off for the last few years, not thinking much of it, and it just kind of hit me about a week ago and I can't stop thinking about it now. 6 years ago, my boyfriend at the time, husband now, woke me up sweating and vibrating, in absolute fear. I asked him what was wrong, and he began stuttering and telling me I would never believe him. He went on to tell me that he was woken up around midnight to this person standing at the end of the bed. Yes, my first thought was sleep paralysis as well. But he sat up and was ready to attack if he needed to. And in his head, he heard a voice that wasn't his, telling him it was okay and that they weren't there for any ill reason. He said he felt immediately calm from that. He also noted he was shocked with how light of a sleeper I am, that his movements didn't wake me. This being was unnaturally tall and actually had to crouch a little due to its height and us being asleep in my basement. He said that this being reached out for a greeting and again began hearing a voice in his head saying, "Hello." Nothing much else happened that night as my husband was frightened. All he remembered at that time was the last thing he heard from it in his mind, and that was, "I'll see you again soon." And then, he said it felt like as if time had started again, not realizing that it had ever felt like it stopped until that point, and he was back in reality. That's when he woke me, feeling it had only been about 10 to 15 minutes when it had actually been over an hour. These visits continued for months, minimum of once a week, max 3 to 4 times, but my husband got less and less frightened each time. This thing and him built a sort of friendship from what he explained to me. It had a name, but for the life of me, I can't remember what he said it was. It answered any and every question my husband had, and I won't mention what those were here. But after a while, it just stopped. He stopped waking me up in the middle of the night or telling me about that the next morning. But the times were always the same. He said he would be awoken around midnight and that they would have discussions about literally anything my husband had curiosities about. And he would come back to reality and time would unfreeze again between 1 a.m. and 1:30 a.m., having only felt like the encounter had lasted a short period of time. Once it stopped, I can't iterate just how much I mean it stopped. It was like for him it never happened. It's been 6 years, so I know this is choppy, but it's hard to remember everything with it having been so long ago now. I forgot about it for so long, and I don't know what prompted me to remember it about a week ago. But now I can't stop thinking about it and the oddness of it, and just how it just stopped so suddenly. And he's literally never made mention of it ever again. And I never brought it back up to him the last week in fear that he may think I'm crazy. Which I don't know why that's my fear, but part of me thinks if there's a chance he's completely forgotten it, whether it be on his own or by something else, he may think I've gone insane. Anyways, this is long, so if you read the whole thing and have any ideas or similar stories, please let me know. I'm trying to figure this out now, and it's literally keeping me up at night. This happened a few months ago. So, I work as a nurse and started a new job 45 minutes away at a nursing home that pays well and has the shift I want. The shift I normally work is weekend doubles, evenings and overnights, a 16-hour shift a day. But they needed me to work morning and evening this particular weekend, and I agreed. The night shift nurse who came to relieve me was late Sunday night. I was behind on charting anyways, so I didn't get upset. I was giving report and heard a yelling resident on the floor. He was with it and said he'd fell. He was wearing warm socks that are not non-slip. He was sent to the ER due to his hip. More charting, state reportable if broken. Get out of work at 1 to 2 a.m., close to a 20-hour shift after a 17-hour shift the day before. I was dead on my feet, but I felt well enough to drive. The way I go home has a lot of twists and turns. I travel by the lake and love the water, so it helps me stay awake. I realize around here that I am not wearing my glasses, but I'm too lazy to turn around to go get them. I only wear them to work and drive, but take them off to chart. I forgot them a lot. I go past a small town with twists and turns and woods, listen to my book to keep awake. About halfway home now. At the next turn, there is a bright light like a spotlight coming through the woods. I continue on a little bit further, still in the wooden area and towards where the bright light is coming from. On the side of the road, where the night before I saw a hit deer, there was what looked to be a very thin man. Skin-tight, black clothes kneeling over the deer that is still there, his back towards me. I thought he looked weird, but my glasses were gone and my eyes started to blur a little bit. The spotlight was coming from the woods, pointing towards the man. I remember thinking about the light, thinking about how they got their vehicle through the woods, but again, I was just dead. I try to pause my book and to slow down my car to nearly a stop. The man starts to move from the deer. I roll down my window and ask, "Is everything okay? Do you need any help?" Not really looking at him. I thought that maybe it was a different deer that he had hit. I am about 15 or 20 or so feet in front of them. My car is stopped at this point, and I'm still trying to get my book to stop. My touchscreen radio isn't working well, so I pick up my phone and stop the book that way. I really look towards the man after looking away from my phone, finally getting my book to stop, and realize that he or she really isn't a human. I freeze. It has stood up and faced me now. The head is huge, like they described aliens to be, with huge eyes, except this one is tall, not a tiny thing like they show on TV. It starts to walk towards my car, and I can't breathe. I can't move. I felt like I couldn't even think. Everything just felt like it froze. I heard a voice, not mine, that sounded like it was in my head say, "Sleep." I blink. It's gone, along with the deer. I look at my clock, and it's almost 4 a.m. My car is now in park, and I'm pulled over with no memory of doing so. My window is still down. I look at my phone, which is still in my hand, open it, and my book is still stopped in the same place. I try to call my sister, but she wouldn't answer, so I call my job instead. They do answer, and I just ask about my glasses and the resident. I eventually tell her I fell asleep and wanted to talk to someone so it doesn't happen again, and everyone else is asleep. So she stayed on the phone till I got home. I really don't think I fell asleep, but I pretend I did so I don't go insane. I haven't told anyone this. It scares me just thinking about it. If I did fall asleep, I could have hurt someone. If I didn't, then what? I grew up in a very small mountain town of less than 1,000 people. We had many creepy stories children shared around, some silly, like a creepy snake monster in the school toilet, and some with more history to them, like skinwalkers. In fact, the town is very close to the Navajo Reservation and Navajo ruins. I had a native friend in middle school who told me one was after her. She wasn't supposed to tell anyone, but she was so scared she ended up telling some of her friends anyway. She's fine now, in case anyone had wondered. This story is a bit in between those two in terms of legitimacy, but it was weird. In middle and elementary school, it was common for kids to go to the high school football games, as there wasn't really much else to do. The football field was surrounded by woods, and kids had a story about a witch that lived in them. You supposedly were not allowed in the woods, because it was someone else's property, but there wasn't anything there like a house, and we never were told who lives there, so of course kids went in anyway. If you walked into the woods a bit, you could find an area the witch supposedly went sometimes. It was a semi-cleared out area in the field of trees, far enough in that you couldn't see the football field through the trees, but could easily find your way back. There's an old decrepit shed there, borderline falling into a ditch, and many broken glass bottles lying around, but that's about it. This particular day, my parents dragged me to the game, and another kid and I decided to go into the woods to cure our boredom. We waited till the game got busy and no one was looking, then headed into the trees. There was somewhat of a path, but we still needed to duck under and push branches out of the way the whole walk. When we reached the clearing, there was still the same old building falling apart and shards of glass everywhere, but a few other things I hadn't seen before in the times I went there. First off, there were some children's school chairs, the cheap plastic kind, in different colors, and some were sun-bleached. They sat in a circle in the middle of the clearing. Then, there were also a few socks from like a baby or a toddler, somewhat similar in size to each other but clearly from different pairs, and they just laid scattered on the ground. All of this was weird, but still fun, spooky things, so we looked around a bit longer. That's when we found an old axe on the ground, like very old looking. I don't think it had been used for cutting wood anymore, that kind of old. Then there was some dried blood on it, or paint. I really hope it was paint. Either way, it freaked us out, so we left. You'd think that'd be the end of it, but no. Apparently we felt the urge to go right back in there. This time we took a slightly different path. On the way in, we found a cat. It was dead. I couldn't tell the color. It was like I had on night vision goggles, but everything was a different shade of tan and orange instead of green. It laid there with its mouth wide open, like it was screaming at us. And despite being dead, its eyes were even more bright and reflective than most living cats. They were open as wide as possible and just staring, looking both terrified and terrifying. There was no evidence of its cause of death, no visible injuries that we could see, and it didn't look especially old. It didn't even have a smell. At that point, we just left. I never returned to those woods, and I still wonder what was going on there. Maybe I should go back. I don't really know where to post this, so I thought I would start here and see. So please excuse the spelling and the way the story is written. I'm not much of a storyteller. For reference, I'm a 40-year-old something male from the South. What happened to me yesterday and the past 4 Sundays has my whole belief system upside down. I am a Southern Baptist Christian, and this is the story that happened to me starting 4 weeks ago. I do overnight security part-time on the weekends, and everything was going normal until 3 hours before I had to get off. So at 5 o'clock Sunday morning, the phone rings, and it's the guy who relieves me at 7 every weekend morning. We'll call him Todd. Todd. Hey bud, I'm gonna be a couple hours late this morning due to car trouble. Me. Alright, just get here as soon as you can. Now this just threw my whole day apart. I knew I wouldn't have the time to make it to church, for I normally like to go home to take a shower and change clothes first. See, I work an hour and a half from where I live and then another 30 minutes to my church. It's okay, I'll just go to the night service, I thought. Well, At 7 a.m., Todd showed up just like he had said. I left work to just go home. About 4 miles from where I work, I saw a sign. To Christ Community Church, 6 miles this way. The arrow was pointing to the left. So I thought, why not? Church is church, right? What I pulled up to was just jaw-dropping to me. The church looked as if it had just been built, and the parking lot looked as if it had just been poured, and there was a small graveyard out back. I went in and enjoyed the service, and then afterwards the pastor came up to me. We'll call him Paul. But what was weird is everyone else stayed where they were. Me and Pastor Paul talked like we were old friends for about 15 minutes, and then he stated that he had a business meeting the next morning, but he did ask me to come back the next Sunday. Well, the next Sunday rolled around, and I did return, and this time the church members were a lot more inviting. They all would gather around me to shake my hand and ask me if I was going to join them. This kept happening until today. And see, my pastor from my church called me this morning asking if we could meet for lunch. We'll call him Gary. Gary, we have missed you so much in church. Is everything all right? So I broke down and told Gary everything. The look I got was really surprising. Gary, we can't keep you if you decide to go to another church, but you haven't been going to Christ Community Church. Me. Yes, I have. They're really good there. And I'm not leaving my church for them, just visiting. Gary, it's impossible for you to go to that church. An earthquake happened and a sinkhole opened up and killed all that were there in 1908. Please, tell me what I should do. A few years ago, my anxiety was high. I was already at a point in my life where I thought I was a little out of it. But that was amplified by a lot when I kept repeatedly hearing noises outside my window. Like every single night, it just wouldn't stop. I would finally get so freaked out, I'd go wake my parents and get them to look outside. But they never found anything. I started to think I was just crazy or subconsciously seeking attention. One morning, my grandfather discovered one of our lawn chairs beneath our bathroom window. It's pretty high up, and the bottom pane is fogged, so I'm not sure that the chair even helped, but it was left there regardless. The next night, I heard sounds again. Nothing. The next night, however, we checked outside and discovered something that made my stomach churn. A small stepladder was sitting directly outside my window, back just enough to allow someone to sit on it, but still see. On my windowsill was a bag of now cold McDonald's, which is just up the street from me. Most of the food was still in there, but still, some fucker had been watching me doing absolutely nothing of interest in my room without me knowing for I don't know how long. The cops were called, and nothing happened, of course. I felt crazier than ever. No one was to be found, but at least we had some evidence that someone that shouldn't be hovering around our house was at my window, watching intently through the blinds, in a space between the two curtains. Heard noises the next night, ran outside, and again nothing. Earlier in the night, I'd sewn my curtains together, which hopefully made it harder to see in. Apparently it did, because now the fucker had taken to climbing on top of our air conditioning unit, and from there climbing onto our garage, where they could stand so that they could see above where the drapes went. The handprints and shoe prints were left on the lid to prove it. I should also mention that there were now holes in my screen, and I heard these holes being created. He took a stick and sharpened it somehow, and we found it outside my window. He was trying to stealthily break away the screen bit by bit, and the hole is still there. The next night, I distinctly heard the gravel near my window crunch. There was simply no mistaking the sound. As stealthily as I could, I let out a small moan he surely heard and rolled just out of view, as if I were sleeping, then pressed myself against a wall out of view of the window, very quietly opened my door, and crept down the hall. My heart was pounding. Normally I knock on my parents' door, but I knew the slightest sound would make the bastard bolt, so I quietly opened the door and snuck in, then informed them that there was, without a single doubt in my mind, someone outside my window. They didn't mind the intrusion and got up, got dressed, formulated a plan, and crept to the back door. I ran to the bathroom to stand on the edge of our tub and peek out the window just as the back door was thrown open and my parents ran outside like morons. And sure enough, they saw him. They started screaming as the man leapt off the Herbie and bolted down our driveway, which was what I was looking at. They screamed all sorts of horrible things at the top of their lungs. "You sick motherfucker, I'm gonna fucking kill you," from my dad. "You fucking freak," from my mom. He ended up escaping across the street, hiding behind a house adjacent to us. The balls on this bastard. He kept peeking out at all of us as we stood outside, but we wanted to leave him there so the cops could finally nab him. They were called, they came, and they searched, but they never found him. The bastard must have hopped a fence or some shit. Still, to this day, I hear sounds outside my window, even in the dead of winter, but he's never out there. He might have just been a peeper, but he targeted me specifically and for months until he was almost caught. What really pisses me off is that once he lost interest in me because it was too unsafe. He moved on to a house down the street with 2 little girls. He actually managed to get in through their window, and their dad caught him just standing in the middle of the room, watching them sleep. Jacking it, I think. I still don't think he was caught, even then. All I know is that this could have been way worse, but it messed me up. I trust the men in my neighborhood even less now. The men around here stare very blatantly. I've been chased home by one, actually. I've had a guy try to jerk me into his car when I was passing him, telling him no, and that I didn't need a ride, and to just leave me alone. All these years later, I still hear shit outside my window and freak out. It's fucked up. I turn out my lights entirely to exercise, and I do my best to avoid the windows when I undress. It just scarred me, even though I know it wasn't really a huge deal, I guess. There's this guy I met at the same time I met my current boyfriend, even met him in the same place. About 10 years older and totally not my type. I only talk to him when absolutely necessary. Altogether, maybe 2 hours of completely impersonal and polite, I don't have the guts to tell you to fuck off kinds of conversations. Well, my boyfriend and I start dating, and that other guy blows it. Follows us to the club, I notice, freak out, run to the bathroom with a girlfriend, and my boyfriend talks to him. Guy starts acting like a 5-year-old, even cries. At that point, we leave. About a month later, I find a creepy love letter in my mail. He had delivered it himself. That creep had followed me to my door and found out where I lived. Fast forward 1 year, and I no longer frequent the place I met him because he basically lives there. Neither does my boyfriend. Apart from a few awkward, unavoidable run-ins in the city, nothing. Until exactly a year after I started dating my boyfriend. I get a card in the mail, delivered himself, asking me out as if nothing happened and as though we were dating. It was a whole year of no contact. I didn't react, of course. We moved. In the summer, we did have contact. I started noticing the guy at the mall. First, I thought it was a coincidence, but then a shop owner I know tells me the guy is following me and keeps hiding when I turn around. What the fuck? I tell him the whole story. He promises to inform other owners he knows and call mall security next time he sees the creepo. It's been well over 2 years. I don't want to work as a waitress, even though I desperately need the money, because I know he would find me and sit there all day and night watching me. I don't want to work anywhere near the place I met him, which is basically anywhere near city center. I don't go to the mall alone anymore. I don't go to certain supermarkets and cafes because I know he frequents them. I don't even know this guy's last name, and he controls where I go and where I'm cautious, even where we move to. I wish I could leave the city, but I can't. And even if I did, he knows both my first and last name, and I only know his first name and what he looks like. He can easily find me, and it's going to be even easier once I finish university, since I aim for a university teaching position, and they display your info on the internet. They have to, for the students. He could come to my open classes or lectures. He could follow me again. I'm scared. In my late teens and early 20s, I was friends with a girl named Lucy. She was a very lonely kind of girl whose parents were, well, honestly, really shitty parents. Her mother was verbally abusive, and her father really couldn't care less about anything. Because of the lack of love in her life, Lucy searched through dating sites for love and comfort from strange men, and she was not afraid of meeting them face to face, even if they'd been chatting for only a few days. My friendship with Lucy was a strange one. I found her quite annoying sometimes, but I also felt awful for her because of her loneliness and lack of friends and love in her life. Sometimes I really didn't want to hang out with her, and some days I would accept her offer to hang out. When it was just her and I together, she was normal and okay to be around, but also very appreciative of having someone giving her attention. We had a small group of friends, and she would try to get all of us together as often as possible, and honestly, the whole group together was really quite fun. When we were all together, Lucy was very hyper, and you could just tell that she was happy to be around people who didn't insult her as her mother does. Suddenly, Lucy tells us she has a boyfriend. We were all surprised because we knew she had met a bunch of guys online, but we had never heard her say anything about dating anyone. A few days later, she sets up a day for our friend group to meet Trevor. None of us were looking forward to it because we thought he was going to be like all the others, a temporary boy toy. When we met him, we all felt awkward. He barely spoke a word. He wouldn't look directly at any of us at all. Lucy would try to be funny, but he would just give her dirty looks. Needless to say, we thought he was a weird one and could tell he didn't care much for her. As the days went on, Lucy kept telling me how much Trevor did not like me. This was weird because no one ever disliked me. I'm always polite, respectful, and I smile a lot at everyone, but for some reason, he did not like me. She kept saying he thinks I am using Lucy for her money. Not sure how he thought that since I paid for everything for Lucy. To keep this piece of the story short, I think he was trying to find reasons to convince her to get rid of me. I got a terrible vibe from Trevor. He dressed like he didn't care about life. He never smiled. He didn't shake our hands when first meeting us. He stank of weed and really had an overall uncomfortable feeling about him. After months of Trevor trying to convince Lucy that I'm a terrible friend and she should not hang out with me anymore, she started to do as he said. She would start to hide me from him. If she and I were together, and he would call her on her phone, she would lie and say I wasn't there. If she was with the group of friends, he would have her swear I wasn't there. When he was going to be joining the group on an outing or just hanging out at her place, she would tell me I couldn't come. Lucy will do whatever a boyfriend says just to keep pleasing him so she doesn't lose them. Now here's where it gets scary. Lucy calls me one day and says she wants me to come hang out at her place. I agreed. She came to pick me up, we went to her house and watched TV for a bit. We then decided since it's a nice day outside, we would take her 2 dogs for a walk to a nearby pocket park and would later return to the house to have lunch together. While at this park, she receives a phone call. Now, let me say that Lucy is not a private person whatsoever and has never, ever walked away to answer a phone call until this day. She walked far enough away that she knew I would not be able to hear anything she said. This was suspicious to me, but not enough to question it. The call ends and she begins walking toward me with a look on her face as if she is trying not to smile. She tells me, "So, I need to bring you home now." I was slightly confused as we had only been together for about an hour, when we usually spend the entire day together, and she would never want me to go home. She would even frequently beg me to sleep over to avoid being alone. So anyway, I said okay and we walked to drop off her dogs at home and we got into her car and off we went. About 10 minutes into the car ride, I realized she wasn't going in the direction of my house, so I questioned it. "Where are we going?" She smirked, but didn't respond. I asked again, laughing uncomfortably. "Seriously, where are we going?" She continued to smirk, but didn't want to answer me. I started to realize she was heading in the direction of where her boyfriend lived. Oh, hell no. I asked one last time with anger in my voice, "Where are you taking me?" Her only response was bone-chilling to me. "Trevor wants to talk to you." Nope, I wasn't having any of this. I insisted and demanded she let me out of the car. But with her evil smirk and same response, she said it again. "It's okay, he just wants to talk to you." I was furious at this point because this creepy guy who looks like he wants to kill someone, who also despised me, wanted to talk to me. Why can't he talk to me on the phone? Why do I need to go to his sketchy apartment? She absolutely refused to let me out of the car. She had locked the doors, as if I wasn't able to unlock my passenger door. I waited until she reached a red light, I grabbed her wallet from the back seat and took out her bus pass and bolted out of the car. I had no idea where I was or where the nearest bus stop was, but I was not about to let her crazy-ass boyfriend do whatever he wanted to me. She yelled for me to get back into the car, but of course I ignored her. She sped off furiously. I immediately blocked her number in my phone. I removed her as my friend on social media and immediately warned the group of friends not to talk to her because she had gone nuts. I have not spoken to her since that very day, and she also lost the other 5 friends of the group as well. After this situation, Lucy, I hope you're truly lonely now. I was 17 years old when this story happened to me 3 years ago now. I was working at an old pizza shop right on the edge of my town. For context, the town I was in is an affluent suburban town surrounded by a bypass which loops around the town. Around my town is some farmland and main roads, where all the blue-collar workers moved to after the town was gentrified 10 to 15 years back. This pizza shop was around for 20 years and was very catered to these same blue-collar workers. It's around 9 p.m. and a call comes in for 2 pizzas and a 2-liter of soda. I'm the only driver in, so I have to take the delivery out. It's about a 10-minute drive to get to this location. There I have to drive up a long gravel driveway that took 5 minutes to get up. My car really couldn't handle the gravel and how rough it was. Arriving at the place, I see a nice house and 2 barns plotted across the land, with wheat 5 to 6 feet tall surrounding the whole property. I've been really anxious around farms because of how creepy I think they are. Being at this place when I felt truly all alone really started to make my anxiety flare. I decided to call the number on the order because I have no idea where this guy wants me to go and drop off his food. After about another 5 minutes of absolute silence, the man picks up. He had a very deep and raspy voice, like he's been a career smoker, which didn't do anything to help me feel better. I was told to meet him at his truck at the far barn on his property. I am now properly shitting myself as my mind races of all the worst possible things that could happen to me. I pulled myself together and muster further into this guy's property. I see the man's truck as I round one of those cylinder storage units where I see his F-150 and him inside. Instead of getting out, I call him and ask him how we should do the transaction. In his same deep voice, he instructs me to get out of my car and put all of the food onto his truck bed. Since he paid with his credit card already, I thought this would have been over in 10 seconds. I do what he tells me to do and walk over to the passenger window so that he can sign his receipt. The man looks to be around his mid-40s, heavy-set, with a scraggly black beard and a trucker hat. I'm a pretty skinny guy, so with my mind already racing on being kidnapped or murdered, I really didn't feel safe around this guy. I ask him if he has a pin on him, because I forgot to bring one. I was pretty bad at my job. And he did not have any cash on him. He stares at me with his cold eyes and points into the back of his truck, saying to me, "If you ask me for a tip, I'm going to be sticking this tip down your fucking throat," where he has a double-barrel shotgun just in the back of his car. I'm frozen in fear as I'm registering that this man has just threatened to kill me. Not only that, but this is the second time this has happened this shift. Yeah, I kid you fucking not. The first time was because I messed up the address for a house, and a man in his 60s wearing a cowboy hat and a fucking WWE belt comes out and says he has the right to shoot trespassers when I was just trying to see if I was at the right house. The only thing I can muster out is, okay, and I get back into my car and get the fuck out of that farm. I was going so fast on that, I fucked up my car from my car bouncing around on that gravel path. I go 80 all the way back to the pizza parlor, where I tell my coworkers what happened. None of my coworkers took me seriously and just thought I was playing this up as a joke. I go home and forget about it pretty quickly, but a year later I'm working the lunch shift, and the same man calls and orders a pizza. Now at this point I'm refusing to take this order, but this was during COVID, and the place was on its last legs already, so management forced me into going anyway. It was only 1 to 2 p.m. on a Sunday, so at least my fear of the dark would be covered. I get there and the man is waiting for me at his actual house. He recognized me, and out of all the things started apologizing to me for what he said. He was excusing it, saying that he just started going through a divorce. and was struggling with his emotions. I just wanted the whole thing to be over with, and he gave me a $60 tip for what happened. Still, to the man on the farm, I hope we never meet again. This was a personal experience that happened over a year ago, and it's been a mystery to me ever since. Any information explaining what possibly could have happened would be greatly appreciated. This is in NSW, Australia. I was at my aunt's holiday house in for the weekend. It was just a regular night, a little bit wet, but everything was normal. So it was around 11:40 p.m., and my dog was sleeping on my bed. Then he quickly got up and started barking his head off to go outside, so I let him. This is unusual behavior for my dog. He runs to the other side of the backyard, which is about 15 meters away from the porch, and then stops barking. He was silent. I turned around for 2 seconds to look at my mom, who had just come out to see what was going on. I turned back around and my dog was just sitting on the front porch, looking at me like nothing happened. I don't know how he ran back so fast without me noticing, but anyway, here's the interesting bit. Me and my mom hear this loud buzzing sound, not like an electric sparking sound, nothing natural like we had ever heard before, and a bright lime green light came shining directly down, lighting up the whole backyard perfectly, like a precise laser scan. And it happened twice. Shining and buzzing, there was a pause, and then more shining and buzzing. There was a roof over the back porch, so I couldn't look up to see where it had come from. My instant thought was aliens. The whole thing was so bizarre, like nothing I had ever heard or seen before. It started as a deep buzz to a higher pitched buzz and back to a deep buzz, with the green light as the buzzing was happening, and then the whole thing just stopped. Then my dog slowly crept inside and went back up onto my bed and was whimpering. The light couldn't have been from a power line because there would have been a shadow casting from the roof of the house, and sparks don't give off green light anyway, especially not as bright and neon as the one I saw. Can someone please respond and explain? I will never forget. Summer before 7th grade, sometime in July. It was a Wednesday night, maybe early Thursday morning. The evening before, my family had watched the old school show Unsolved Mysteries. I awoke in the night, lying on my right side, awake, but my eyes still shut, completely silent. None of us ran fans back then to aid in sleep. I was awake and basically waiting to fall asleep again. However, I decided to open my eyes. On the right side of my bed, right there, was a being, seemingly fixated on a plush bear that I had kept in the bed with me. And this being fit all of the descriptions I'd ever heard about or watched on television. Shorter, pale gray skin, and those awful eyes, huge, black, and slanted, staring at my bear right by my bed. Honestly, I couldn't put into words how I felt right at that moment. I was only just about 12 at that time. At some point, I pulled my covers over my head and felt an awful rushing through my body of super warm, then cool, and then warm again. Only later in my life did I understand that I was most likely feeling shock. I couldn't scream. I felt frozen. Too scared to scream, maybe? What if I did scream? My mother and stepfather and 2 brothers would hear me. What the heck would they do if they came into the room and saw this thing? What would it do? Is it going to kill me? Abduct me? What if it already had and they're just returning me? All of these thoughts plus a million more just racing through my young mind. Ugh, awful just recounting all of it and writing it here. Again, how could I ever forget something traumatic like this? So being such a brave 11-year-old, and after what felt like 12 hours, I decided to try and scare it. I decided I would thrash my legs up and down from under my covers as hard as I could. I know, horrifying. I was so petrified though, so I did this and remained under my covers just waiting. Nothing happened. So I stayed under the covers. This had to be at least close to going on 2 hours from when I first opened my eyes and saw this thing. As I laid wide awake, I heard a noise. To this day, I still cannot explain exactly how it sounded. The sound felt as if it surrounded me and was coming from outside. It was a crisp, clean sounding sound. Maybe mechanical, but maybe not, lasting only about 2 seconds. A sound that I definitely had never heard before and definitely have not heard since. As soon as I heard this sound, something in my mind told me, oh, they're gone. As crazy as it sounds, I firmly believe the sound was their transportation leaving. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for the rest of the night or early morning. It took me so long to confide in my family about this terribly scary incident. Of course, they didn't believe me. However, now, from time to time, my mother will mention it and suggest that maybe that's why I suffer from insomnia now. Very well could be. This is my first post here in Reddit. Feel free to share any thoughts. Also my first time sharing this story publicly. It would be reassuring to hear any other stories or similar happenings. When I first got my dog, I was obsessed with taking her out on little hike journeys through the woods across the street from my house. She was a Husky and German Shepherd mix, and all black, so when it got dark it became a bit harder to see her, but I didn't mind. One night, I decided to stay out and walk with her a bit longer despite it being so dark. I can't see anything in front of me, and I have to use the flashlight on my phone just to avoid logs and thick, fallen branches. Everything is fine until she disappears from the circle of light, venturing beyond what is visible to me. I wasn't all that worried. Usually, if I felt the need to call her back, I'd just clap my hands and she'd come running to my side, so I continued my walk. I could still hear her steps crunching in the distance, but when I got cold, I was immediately ready to go home. I don't do well with cold temperatures, so I started clapping my hands. She returns as usual, but as soon as I hook her leash on, there's another clapping somewhere off in the distance. No one moved a single muscle, neither of us. But she had her attention dead set in one direction. My flashlight didn't light the space far enough for me to see, but I could tell she had spotted the intruder. The clap came again, and this time her hackles raised, and I took several steps to leave, but she wouldn't move. My throat was dry and my heart was beating so hard I could feel it thumping all the way to the tips of my toes. By the fourth tug, I was practically choking her. I think I was on the verge of shitting myself, to be honest, so when she snapped her attention to me and bolted, I almost sobbed with relief. I don't think I could have lived with myself if I was forced to leave her there, nor do I think I would have had the heart to. We would have just died together. No sooner than another round of clap sound. We're sprinting through the woods like the ground is about to collapse beneath our feet. It was the longest run I've ever experienced in my life, and my stamina was absolute shit back then, so I was winded after mere seconds, and my chest burned from an upcoming asthma attack. I made it home in record time though, and when I burst through the door, my family looked at me as if I had lost my fucking mind, but I couldn't breathe in enough air to talk. I'd been taken off the asthma pump years ago due to the complete lack of problems. Doctors believed I was almost asthma-free, so it took me 45 minutes for my breathing to even out enough to get out a few words. I didn't walk her in the woods at night anymore. As a matter of fact, I didn't walk her at all without someone else with me. Next time, I might actually shit myself, so I'd like to avoid a next time altogether. P.S. Turns out it was a homeless man camped out there. He was known to harass people and was later arrested for sexual assault. I went on a mountain hike in Transylvania with a group of friends from school, and way up, after maybe 12 or 14 kilometers of trekking, we saw a house. It was in the middle of nowhere. It had a barn with a few animals, a couple of cows, chickens, etc. As we get closer, we see a few people. A guy and 5 to 6 women. I'm not sure if there were more inside. The dude comes to greet us, barely speaking the language, and we had a hard time understanding what he was trying to say. They lived without electricity, gas, or anything. This was in the early 90s, so there's no internet, mobile phones to worry about. At least for most people, that is. Anyway, they all looked weird, kinda dumb expressions on their face. We can barely understand each other. They asked us who's the president now, and if we want some milk. They look at our clothes and shoes weirdly, curious, like who knows when was the last time they had human contact. Or maybe there were more of those crazies around these parts, I don't know. Not sure to this day what was going on, to be honest. It's not typical in the region, so we kinda just freaked out, especially because the dude looked a bit disturbed, and we were way too young to be messing around with that. We were looking around to see if there's any more of them, thinking there must be a village nearby, and paranoia was getting to us. What was also weird is that all the women kept their distance, and they never got close to us, like he was guarding them or checking us out if it was safe for them. One of my friends kept saying we don't want their milk and we needed to go because it was getting dark. We walked calmly for a while, and then when we thought we were out of their sight, bolted like crazy out of there. Needless to say, we camped after a few hours, and we always had one person awake to keep watch. We told people that were living in the villages near that area about the mountain people, and they didn't believe us. They said nobody lives there, up in the mountains. My story actually involves an ex-boyfriend. The stalking started after the breakup, but the entire relationship was fucked up. We had been friends for a few years when we started dating my junior year of high school. After we started dating, he completely became a different person. Or maybe let the true him shine through. He'd always grab my phone and look through my text messages and call logs. He wanted to be together all the time, no matter what, even if I was studying. He had already graduated high school and worked full-time at this point. I'd have random crazy girls calling me, telling me they were going to beat me up or they were going to, quote, fuck my man. He'd be insanely jealous, and when we'd fight, he'd get so mad he'd throw his phone across the room or across the street. The whole relationship was crazy, and I tried to end it at least 6 or 7 times over the 1.5 year span of it all. Every time we'd break up, he'd go batshit crazy and do the I'm going to kill myself bit. He'd call and call and call and want to talk and talk and talk until eventually I would say, if I agree to get back together with you, will you back off? I know, not healthy, but I had shit to do, like sports, school, and a job, and didn't have time to deal with it. It was easier just to agree to get back together. One time, I broke up with him, and he told me he had been having headaches, so he went to the doctor that day and found out that he had a brain aneurysm and only had 8 months to live. We had 2 friends die in car accidents on the same day, exactly 1 year apart from each other. So when I realized that 8 months from then would be the same month as our friends' deaths, I was completely freaked out, and we got back together because I honestly believed we had some curse against our friends and that exact date. So here's where it gets really crazy. My senior year, I had no idea how to get out of this relationship, so I started looking into out-of-state colleges, figuring there was no way he'd follow me. He must have seen the brochure from the college I was interested in, because suddenly he wanted to go to that college. He even went as far as taking the SATs. I knew my plan wasn't going to work. He'd follow me wherever I went. So what did I do? I joined the fucking army. That'll show him. Try following me in there, right? Next thing I know, he's meeting with a fucking recruiter. Of course, the likelihood of him being stationed where I was is very slim, but I didn't know that at the time. I was young and scared. I realized the army was a dumb decision, and I wrote the letter to a commissioner, whoever is the head honcho of recruitments. I explained that I had lied on my physical, as the recruiters tell you to do, and sent a copy of all my medical records. I was let out shortly after that. I don't remember how it finally happened, but we actually broke up. I changed my phone number and cut off connection with all our shared friends. Yay! The end of crazy, free at last. Or so I thought. For the next few months after the breakup, he'd randomly show up where I was. The movie theater, the tennis courts, restaurants that we never went to before. He'd want to talk, but I'd always say I had to leave immediately. He'd get furious if he saw me with another guy, no matter who the guy was. It could have been my cousin, and he still would have flipped his shit. I still have no idea how he knew where I was going. Once I left for college, it was about 90 minutes away. I thought it'd be over for sure. I heard he had come up to the college a few times to see other friends, but I'd stay in my dorm those nights, afraid that I'd see him if I went out. During my freshman year of college, one of our close friends from the same friend group killed himself. I came home to attend the funeral. My ex was pretty distraught since that was his 3rd friend of ours to die in 3 years. I had no choice but to be nice to him. It was a funeral for our good friend. After the funeral, everyone was going over to a friend's house just to spend time together. I didn't want to go, but my friends convinced me anyway. While at the house, the ex starts talking to me. I act polite, but try to avoid him. Naturally, this doesn't work. He's right next to me all night, trying to kiss me, put his arm around me, whatever he could get. Somewhere, this translates into him thinking we're back together. I tell him I'm leaving. He freaks out, and he gets my number somehow from someone else at the party. He starts texting and calling and texting and calling all the time. This continued for 5 years. 5 years. I moved out of state now, and I don't talk to anyone from back then anymore. Finally, the phone calls stopped. I still get weird whenever I go back to my hometown. I'm constantly surveying the area, scared that I'm going to see him again. And if I happen to be with my significant other, I won't even venture into any part of the city that I think there's a chance he could be in. I once had a classmate. Let's call him Bob. Bob was in a glass closet. He would reaffirm his straightness by repeatedly hitting on all the girls in class. One day, I suggested he explore and embrace his sexuality, instead of hiding and running from it. He decided to prove to everyone how straight he was by dating me, to prove me wrong. The day after that, in chemistry class, Bob excitedly told me he was now my lab partner. "It's chemistry," he exclaimed. I tolerated it. I tolerated Bob spewing unfunny science-ish jokes and trying to edge closer to me. I tolerated him finding me in between classes to give me gifts of fortune cookies. I figured he would just tire and drop the whole thing. I was wrong. One afternoon, a bit after I got home from school, the doorbell rang. I looked outside, and it was Bob. This was in the era when internet was dial-up and few people had it. The time when we still paid money to remove our name and address from phone book listings. The only way he could have learned where I lived was to follow me. When I turned away without answering the door, he began to bang on the door and scream my name. I ended up having to chase him off with a baseball bat. The next day, I went to school and told the administrators what had happened. Turns out, this isn't the first time Bob had done this to a girl. He had stalked some half a dozen other girls and begged for dates. I'm not sure what happened afterward and if he was put into counseling or punished or what. All I know was Bob stopped going to school and pretty much nobody spoke of him again. I went on a Tinder date some time ago while I was adjusting to a new city I had just moved to. I didn't really know anybody there, so I used some online dating apps to see the dating scene around town. I landed one from a girl that seemed just like an artsy hippie type of girl. We had a few exchanges through the Tinder app, and then decided to meet up for a drink. I picked her up at her house and she greeted me at the door and gave me a hug. She said the name of a local bar she wanted to go to for us to chat and get to know each other better. I told her I would drive and proceeded to my car. The first red flag I noticed was when I walked to my car and opened the door. She had just followed me to the driver's side and was standing behind me staring. I looked at her blankly for about 15 seconds and asked her if she was going to get in. She said, "Sure, I would love to," and went the long way to the passenger side around the back of the car. Since I had just met the girl, I figured she had just smoked some weed or something, as I had kind of got that vibe she was a bit of a stoner. As I was driving to the bar, she talked in a very low voice, almost as if she was trying to whisper. I'm not hard of hearing or anything, but I had to ask her to repeat herself several times just so I could make out the full sentences she was saying. When we got to the bar, I made sure we got a seat closer to the back, away from most people, just so I could have a little quiet in order to hear her. The conversations honestly carried on as normal from this point, and it was actually a fun time for the time being. We talked about different things we were both interested in, and she did bring up that she occasionally used recreational weed and a few other tripping substances, like shrooms and such. I'm not much of a fan of these, but at least it made me relax a little in the back of my mind to think she was just high off marijuana, and that rationally explains some of the out-there behavior. Granted, I had a few drinks at this point, so I was honestly not thinking straight. I asked her if she wanted to go to my place after drinks, and she agreed. When we got to my place, we had a few more drinks. Then she started talking about her jewelry. This is where it gets weird. She told me her jewelry was her big secret and it defined her. When I asked her why it was so important, she said, "I'm actually Anastasia, and I was never killed in Russia. My jewelry is a link to my past." It was hard for me to take that serious at this point with how much I drank, so I kind of challenged that statement using a little bit of what I knew about the history. At this point, she freaked out and started yelling at the top of her lungs about how I don't respect ancestors and history. Then she got quiet and tiptoed right up to me and grabbed me by the neck. She then brought my face eye to eye with hers while still holding my neck. She says at this point, "I am a shaman and I will curse you. My ancestors have destroyed many people and you do not respect that. You are from oppressive ancestors and they will be punished." Then, she put her hand in a whiskey glass and made a cross on my face and kissed my forehead. At this point, I started to sober up a little. I talked her into calming down, telling her I was only joking. Then she slowly started getting back to normal. Then, she started talking about her cat fetish. She tells me she has a list of people who she tames to act as cats. I am not about judging people on their fetishes, so I listen in. She then tells me all the things she does to them and starts acting like a cat in my living room. If she had not yelled at me earlier on, I might have almost been turned on by it. My red flags in my head were tingling like crazy at this point, so I just listened and tried not to set her off. She noticed sage on my kitchen counter and asked me to let her light it and bless the house. Side note, I used to sage to make my house smell better occasionally. It's kind of a ritual I like to do, but it's mine and mine own, something I take very personally and like to do myself. I tell her no, she can't light it and it's my thing to do on my own. Then she freaks out again, telling me I am a horrible human being and screaming all over the place. I tell her I can take her home now, and she runs to the door and goes outside. As I get outside, she is screaming at the top of her lungs that I am a horrible person and I should go die. I tell her she can walk herself home then, and then I go back to my place and lock the door. She then starts banging on the door hard in about 10 minutes, saying she left her phone in there. I grab her phone off the kitchen counter and open the door to hand it to her. She tries to barge inside and I block her with my forearm. She then acts like she was about to punch me. I just hold my ground and I tell her she is not coming in. She screams she wanted the whiskey bottle we were drinking from. I told her hell no, because I paid for that damn thing. I slam the door at this point and lock it. I hear her bang on the door for a minute. I then hear her footsteps going down the stairs. I waited about an hour and then went walking outside to see if she was still hanging around. I didn't see her anywhere, nor did I ever see her again after that. I know this is probably not the scariest encounter ever, but for the next few nights I was creeped out always walking around the area I lived to make sure she wasn't hanging around. I honestly hope she's okay wherever she is, but I hope to never see her again. Alright, first off, I want to apologize if my English is a bit broken, as I'm not a native speaker, but let's move forward. When I was a kid, my mom worked as a teacher and she was very close to a coworker of hers who had a son around my age and of whom I, as well, was very close. When my mom or her friend would head out for the night, the other would take care of both of us kids, and basically, it meant I spent half my time over there and my friend spent half of his time at my house, which was perfect and fun for both of us. We lived in different cities, but since that kind of system had been going on pretty much since forever, I grew up knowing my friend's city just as well as mine. His mom was well aware of that, so that being said, whenever we were going on a walk in their area, she'd let us wander around because she knew we'd always find our way back to her. My mom, though, was more cautious and always kept an eye on us, as she'd walk behind us to make sure she was always able to see us. I just wish her friend would have done the same. One day, I had to be around 6 or 7. We were going on a walk with my friend Marcus and his mom Katie. It was a very sunny day, and I was wearing a dress with embroidered flowers and I had my blonde long hair down. I often heard I was a pretty kid, even from strangers in the street, and besides making me and my parents somewhat uncomfortable, nothing bad ever happened. During that walk, Katie was walking ahead of us, and I was chatting and just fooling around with Marcus, when he suddenly remembered something urgent to tell his mom, as urgent as something can be for an 8-year-old boy. He ran up to her and left me strolling behind for a couple minutes, just as it already had happened 100 times prior. That time, though, we were circling around a big camping site, and we walked by the white vans and camping cars. One of those vans had its back doors open, and there was a man, probably in his late 40s, smoking a cigarette and leaning on his vehicle. He locked eyes with me as I was approaching, then saw that Katie and Marcus weren't paying much attention to me as they were already a couple meters ahead. Then he proceeded to pull me by my arm close to him, and so I found myself with my body touching his, so weirded out that I didn't even say a word, although I knew Katie would have heard me if I called for help. He leaned toward me as he was obviously much taller than I was, muttering something I didn't get, and he winked at me and kissed me on the lips, and then pulled me into the open doors of his van. At this point, if he had pushed me just a little, I would have fell into the truck. I was just too scared to even lift a finger, and even though I didn't understand everything that was going on, I knew it wasn't okay. He put his hands on the doors as to close the vehicle, and I felt my heart sink. At that exact moment, some other man jogged towards us, in his 40s as well, waving hello to me and saying something along the lines of, "I lost sight of you for a bit." I was so scared. He had a very friendly look on his face and was staring at me with great insistence and with a huge reassuring smile, and the van man awkwardly laughed and yanked me out of the way of the car, slamming the doors shut. I ran to Katie as I heard the van go off and just acted as if nothing had happened. To this day, I never told that story to anyone. Not to Katie or Marcus. Not to my mom, nobody. I'm 22 years old today. So, to the friendly guy who obviously didn't lose sight of me or whatever, but just probably saw everything and wanted to interfere, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. To the pedophile who surely would have abducted me and who was strangely okay with kissing a kid in public in broad daylight, I'm not even in the mood to add anything to what happened, but everyone thinks the same thing as I do, and I wish you hell. And let's not ever meet again. Although I think I'd be too old for you anyway. My aunt has this crazy story of this time she saw a UFO right above her house, and it had a glow with a sort of breathing and vibration effect that she said you could feel heavily. She went and took pictures, and in the pictures the UFO still had the glowing and breathing effect. She sent it to her friends and family, and people were freaking out. A couple of days later, though, the UFO in the picture is 100% gone from everyone's phone. I've struggled with the idea of sharing my experience, mostly because I don't know if it actually happened or if it was just a dream. One night, in the summer, when I was about 10 or 11, I was awake in the middle of the night and I could hear the horses running around the pasture as if something had happened. I decided to get up and go check on things. At that time, my family had a massive old barn and we lived in the middle of nowhere. I walked through the door of the barn and found a very large man, as white as snow, climbing into the hayloft. I remember being startled but not scared. He turned around and looked at me, and slowly lowered himself back down. He took a few steps towards me, before he knelt down and put out his hand, like one would do with a stray animal. As I looked at him, I felt like he looked sad and tired, and not at all like he was going to do me any harm. I decided to take his hand and walk him towards our kids' hangout space, which was just a space in the barn where we had some old couches, a few toys, and a radio. As soon as he saw the radio, he became more animated, ran towards it, and started messing around with it. That went on for a bit, and I kept asking him what he needed the radio for. He never said a word, not one word. He wouldn't give me a name, so I started calling him Radio. After some time, he set the radio down and sat down on the couch. I brought over my favorite horse book and started thumbing through the pages, showing him all of my favorite horse breeds. Eventually, he gently took the book from me and closed it as if to say, "I'm done." I got up to put the book away, and he laid down on the couch. I remember him being so large that his head was on the armrest, while his legs hung over the other armrest, at the knee. He was pure white, and I don't recall any hair. His eyes were jet black, but they weren't huge or angular. If anything, they slanted downward and were beady. After he fell asleep, I decided to go back in the house and go to bed, but I put a blanket over him before I went back in. I woke up in the morning, and the whole experience came flooding back to me. My feet were dirty as if I had been outside during the night. I grabbed some snacks and ran out to the barn. I ran to our hangout space and found everything as I would have expected it. The blanket was on the floor, the book was sitting on the table, and the radio was out of place. But he was gone. It's important to know that I had a habit of sleepwalking at this time in my life, so it's very possible that this was all just a dream. At first, I thought he was just a very, very, very strange person, and I hoped he found safety. The memory never left me, and by the time I was a teen, I had decided that I dreamed the whole thing and let it go. Then, Prometheus came out, and I agreed to go see it with friends. When the tall white alien came on screen, I nearly jumped out of my seat. It wasn't an exact likeness, but it was like seeing a ghost. At the time, I knew absolutely nothing about aliens, and the only one I had ever heard of was the classic Little Green Men. Nonetheless, I forced myself to let it go and moved on. As time passed, I started wondering how I could imagine a being that I've never heard of. Could that really have happened? Could radio be real? A little over 18 years ago, I had just gotten out of the military. I drove all the way from Louisiana to my hometown in Montana without incident. I spent a few days at home and then got back on the road because my new home destination was Boise, Idaho. It was February, so instead of going straight down the length of the state, I cut across the panhandle of Idaho into Washington. The highway going straight down through the state is really twisty and very dangerous in the winter. It was a Sunday, and it was very, very early in the morning. As cliché as this sounds, there was quite a bit of fog in the air. I had been driving for a while and I really had to use the bathroom. Now normally, given how I was just out in the middle of nowhere, I would normally just have pulled over on the side of the road and took a whiz, but since it was so foggy and hard to see, I thought it was safer to just wait until I hit the next small town. So I drove for maybe 5 more miles, and I started seeing signs for a town. I can't remember for the life of me the name of the town, but I think it was Linden or Linder or something like that. It was on I-90 going into Spokane Valley. So I head towards the sign, which was a right turn off the interstate, and it's a short drive up this road, and I reached the town. It was small, but I thought nothing of it since I was from a small town in Montana anyway. Now, here's where things start to get odd. There was not a single person to be found. There were cars and businesses, but not a single person to be found. No one walking the street, no one logging trucks or driving around. It was just still as the air. I stopped at a gas station. It was one of those one-and-all places that did car repair, tires, etc., but no one was at the counter. I thought, well, maybe it's just really early. So I went around to the side to see if the bathroom was locked, and it was, of course. As I made my way back around to the front of the building, I saw a delivery truck. It was one of those Coke Classic trucks, except it wasn't moving. Its headlights were on the hazard lights, and the passenger and driver's side doors were open, just sitting there in the middle of the street. Yes, I was getting a bad vibe, so I got back in the car and went back the way I came, and I got back to I-90 and thought again about just pissing on the side of the road, but honestly I was too afraid at that point. Once I reached Spokane, I looked on the map to where I was at that point. I didn't have GPS on my phone or anything like that yet, and I couldn't find it at all on the map. Not for the life of me. Even as I'm writing this now, I looked on Google Maps and nothing by the name of Linden or Linder had appeared on the map. I still to this day will never forget that feeling or just freaky displacement I felt there. When I did eventually get to Boise, I told my friend about it, and he thought I was just trying to rip off some Silent Hill or Resident Evil stuff, and honestly I can't blame people for saying that. But at the same time, that was the reason I wouldn't piss on the side of the road. I kept recalling the part in Resident Evil 1 where the hikers were killed by those murderous dogs. Ugh. Anyway, if you stuck around this long, thanks for reading. And if you know of a town on Highway 2 between Coeur d'Alene, Idaho and Spokane, Washington, people, let me know. This was quite a few years ago now, but me and my friend had this really cool spot to hang out in the woods. You had to walk in the middle of a creek for a kilometer and duck through some sharp bushes and thistles. The hike was really well rewarding though. The spot was about half an acre big. It was pure green grass on an incline with beautiful clear water ponds everywhere. There was tons of wildlife and the butterflies lived there, so there were always lots of those too. So my story begins on the way to this place. My friend Levi and I were walking along the river on the way to the spot. It was in the middle of a valley and nobody ever else went down there. Suddenly, Levi stopped moving and ducked into a bush. I did the same because I thought there must have been some large animal somewhere. I saw him staring up the hill, and so I looked up too. There were two people standing at the top of the hill, heaving back and forth a lifeless body. We watched as if they threw the lifeless corpse down the hill and it bounced off the trees and eventually got stuck on a tree at the bottom. Then they just took off. Me and him were terrified, and I was shaking so badly I couldn't speak, so we decided to verify it was a real body. Levi got about 4 feet away before screaming, "It has nostrils! It's real! Run!" So of course we take off running, and I glance back to see those two people run back to the top of the hill. Me and him ran 2 kilometers through thick bush and trees just to get away from them. The next day, we were with his parents driving to town, and we saw like 10 fire trucks at the school closest to the forest. Terrified, we told his parents, bawling our eyes out, worried that they were going to get murdered. His mom started laughing and said to us, "They were training for a search and rescue. That was a dummy that the firemen had to find." I never slept as good as I did that night. I had a friend from high school who definitely fit into stalker territory. Basically, it was common knowledge that he had a thing for me. I kept rejecting him, first more subtly and then just downright. No, never. It's not going to happen, ever. I figure, whatever, we're in high school, he'll get over it. Eventually, I'm in my senior year of college. His sister goes to a university a bit south of mine, whereas his is a bit north. They ask if they can meet up at my place and stay the night, so we can all get together and visit again. I say that sounds fine, and things go pretty well. Eventually they both leave. My roommates have some of those magnetic letters they keep on the fridge, which I don't pay much attention to. But the morning after he left, my roommate is obviously reading something. She turns to ask me if I wrote this. I read it, and it turns out it's actually a ridiculously over-the-top love poem. I'm immediately horrified because I know exactly where this came from, and my roommates are laughing their asses off. A few days later, I get an email from the guy. He talks about the poem and how he woke up in the middle of the night and saw me reading it, and how hot that was or whatever. I'm trying to figure out how the fuck he could have seen me reading a poem I never saw until after he had left, when I remembered that his sister had dyed her hair the same color as mine. So without his glasses, he must have mistaken her for me. More time passes while I try to avoid the guy in the hopes that he gets the message I've been trying to impact on him for years now. I start looking for jobs abroad for when I graduate, and the guy sends me this email about how if I'm going to move abroad, we really need to get married so that he can justify following me to his parents, and how he's going to need me to support him when he does follow me because he has no desire to learn the language of the country I'm planning on going to. He figures this is a mutually beneficial arrangement, as eventually I'll be able to profit off the tax deductions one gets from being married, so even though he knows I'm not interested in him, this is clearly the most logical option for me, so I don't wind up dying sad and alone after paying full taxes for my whole life. It devolves into this ramble about how he hates characters in TV shows and books who do this whole, "I just want the person I love to be happy," whoever that's with, because he thinks it's more logical for them to just kill that other person and narrow the love interests down. I reply to this email, completely pissed off and more creeped out than I had ever been in my life. He seems to get the message, apologizes, and I cut off ties as best as I can. He gets a girlfriend. I figured this is good. Maybe he's moving on. She adds me on Facebook and starts talking to me. She goes on about how the sex is amazing and I'm really missing out, and how I should just really sleep with this guy. I tell her I'm in no way interested, and she goes on about her other boyfriend back home and how all 4 of us could get married together on the same day. Completely repulsed, I block her. It's been 3 years since then, and now he's back in my hometown and moved in with the only 3 friends I have from high school. They seem to think he's finally over it, so I can only hope. I moved back to my hometown not too long ago and reconnected with an old friend. Her brother got out of prison around the same time. I went to visit her family and he was there. The visit goes great for the exception that her brother will not stop staring at me. I don't think too much about it. I'm accustomed to creepers and figure I've known this family since I was a teenager many moons ago. I think I'm creeped out over nothing. Fast forward a few months, same friend and I go to a show. We had a bit of car trouble before getting there, and the friend's brother happens to be there with his friends. He begins by making lewd comments to me and spends the entire night trying to get uncomfortably close to me. I end up using his sister as a human shield. After the show, I get separated from my friend due to the crowd. Her brother, however, finds me right away and insists that his sister told me to give me a ride since her car is acting wonky. I refuse, and he is trying to pull me towards his car, or a dark alley, who knows. I yell for him to let me go and grab the attention of some nearby good guys who come to my aid. When my friend finally finds me, I tell her what happened. She lets me know she never told him to give me a ride. 2 weeks later, I begin getting texts from her phone, sexually suggestive texts. I love my friend, but I'm pretty sure she doesn't want to see me naked wrapped around her like some of the messages suggest. I called her mother's landline, and she asked me if I had seen her daughter's phone, as it's missing. I tell her I got some texts from it, and she says she will call me back. In the meantime, I figure out it's her brother, as he won't stop texting and finally calls. I'm your neighbor. I'm coming over, and you better let me in. No thank you, sir. I call his mom back and let her know what is going on. I look out my window, and there is his car parked across the street, and it's still running. He's just sitting there, and I can see him talking on the phone. It looks like he is screaming. In the meantime, a police car happens to drive by, and he takes off as soon as possible. His mom calls me back and apologizes for her son's behavior and tells me he won't be bothering me ever again. And he hasn't. Just a quick backstory. I've had a stalker for about 4 years. He was never aggressive or sent me proper threats, so stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear. To be honest, after a while I also wasn't scared anymore since he almost never came close to see me. I know being stalked can affect people severely, even in a case like mine, and that's totally valid, but I guess I just got lucky and was never really psychologically affected by it. His stalking behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts, such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times, but they weren't able to, or really tried to be honest, catch or identify him. About 3 weeks ago, I discovered the German version of subreddit IAMA and thought that people might want to know about what it's like to have a stalker. Since I barely use any social media aside from Reddit and have no personally identifying information here, I didn't think he'd ever see it. One person even asked, "Does he know you're putting him on blast on Reddit?" And I answered, maybe. Maybe it would make him angry. Maybe he'd be turned on. Don't know, don't care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it, and he did not like it. Like I said, he was never aggressive and never came close to me. The closest I know of was when he sent me a picture of myself, unlocking my apartment door, taken from the corner of the steps above. Sorry if that makes no sense. I don't know how else to explain it. But I consider myself a pretty vigilant person, and I'm thinking that he might have hid a camera there instead of being there to take the photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he did. I don't know how he got wind of the AMA, but he did. The next week was quiet, no letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then he left me letters with printed out questions and my answers from the AMA. He also left me a long, hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue I had posted on the German version of AITA. His letters were never hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later, I got a gift, but this time he didn't leave it in the mailbox or at my car like he usually did, no. This time he left it inside the apartment building right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment, but opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was taped shut. As I'm typing it out, I realized that wasn't a good idea at all, and could have ended badly for me. But luckily, he didn't send me a bomb or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, the kind you use to tape off walls when painting, nothing you could use to restrain someone, a TV remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of Band-Aids with a few used ones, not actually, just made it look like they were recording to the police, and a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago, and my boyfriend was next to me but cut out of the photo. The frame was shattered, and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame, and they were also intentionally put inside the crumpled newspaper that was stuffed in there to keep it all in place. I called the police right away and gave it to them. They were more concerned this time, finally, thanks, and told me they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave me any letters or gifts for about another week and a half. But 8 days ago it started again. I found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me, how I haven't been appreciating his effort, how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago, I left my apartment in the morning and heard a crunch sound as I stepped on my doormat. He put broken glass under it in the night. I went off to work because I was in a hurry and was just going to make my boyfriend call the police, but then I found my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, lights smashed, and the windshield had a phrase on it painted, "It's time soon, miss my last name." I went back inside and called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just pissed off at this point, which I made very clear. If, for some reason, you're like me and just too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, then all of this, the letters, gifts, photos, even the damn glass under my doormat, are just really annoying and inconvenient. But my car was useless to me now, and the threat scared even me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police took the footage as evidence, even though the dash cam footage wasn't of high quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before, but they said it's not good enough. And they told me they'd look into it further and promised to send more patrol cars again. Then it was quiet for another 2 days. Until 2 days ago. Someone rang the doorbell at just after 4 a.m. My boyfriend and I got up, and we were both hesitant, but I saw blue lights outside, and just as I got up, I heard them shouting, "This is the police. Please open the door." They told us they were called by one of our downstairs neighbors, who came home from his night shift about an hour earlier and heard someone else enter the building after them before the door fell shut. My neighbors know of my situation, and I've asked them to make sure they don't let strangers into the building. This neighbor then went into his own apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion-activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they turned back on, and they did. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbor are only me and my boyfriend, and a single mom with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 a.m., so he called the police. They came and found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. He should have been able to see the cop cars since there's a little window up there, and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him, and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He's finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a provocative Reddit post, and one very vigilant and caring neighbor, but he's finally done. for now at least. He's facing several charges, and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now I finally got some peace. Today, at 9:30 p.m., for the first time in over a year, I took out the trash by myself in the dark. My boyfriend always did it just to be safe, but today I had nothing to worry about. Many years ago, before kids, rescue animals, a mortgage, and a husband, I was a travel writer in Europe. I did most of my trips alone. This story is about the first time I visited Prague. I'd never been to Prague, and the trip was last minute, so I had little time to prepare. My travel partner had dumped me in another country, and I was determined to make the best out of the trip by visiting a place I'd never been. Upon arrival at the train station, I visited the accommodation office and asked for a hostel not far from the center. In my early 20s, winging it was part of the fun. These days, I'm far less adventurous. The hostel they sent me to was a sprawling, crumbling, slate-gray Art Deco building on a nondescript street about a 10-minute walk to Stair Mezzo. The inside was probably beautiful at one time, but by the time I checked into it, it was full of a shabby, mismatched furniture and cheap stained carpet. Most of the light fixtures were broken, leaving everything but the lobby dark and gloomy. It smelled of standing water and dust. I found my room, a double for $12 per night, and made note of the fact that I had a roommate. She wasn't there, but on her side of the room there was a suitcase, dressed neatly folded across the back of a plastic chair, a scattering of makeup containers on the beat-up desk, and a stack of German fashion magazines on the bed. As I had no plans or goals on this impromptu trip, I spent the afternoon exploring Old Town Square, the Jewish Quarter, and Wenceslaus Square. I purchased some Czech crystals for my mom and painted eggs from a street vendor for myself. I also made reservations for a sunset dinner cruise for one. At around 6 p.m., I returned to my room to shower, change clothes, and unload my purchases. When I left my room about an hour later, there was no indication that my roommate had returned at any point during that day. After the cruise, I stopped at a tiny bar on Tinska and had a glass of wine. I had heard the horror stories about the dangers of Prague, but I felt no more trepidation than I did in any other large city. Sure, the cobblestone streets, fog rolling off the Vltava, backlit Gothic architecture, and winding alleys made me think of Jack the Ripper and Dracula, but in a good way. It was nearly midnight when I returned to my hostel, so I was surprised to find that my roommate still hadn't returned. That wasn't uncommon, though. Backpackers are a fickle lot. She could have gone on a short overnight trip, or just left her stuff behind, hooked up with a guy or girl, and was holed up at their place, or hanging out at another hostel. So I was surprised but not concerned. I took another shower before bed, however, and I was surprised to find that things in the room had changed up in my return. Her bed was neatly turned down, the magazines had moved to the nightstand, and the dress was gone. The strangest thing, though, was the addition of a pink silky nightgown spread across the bed. My bed. Maybe she thought she had the room to herself? I didn't see how, though. My shopping bags, clothes, and toiletries were in plain view. I gently moved the nightgown over to her bed and settled in for the night as I wrote into my journal. I assumed she was in the shower or somewhere nearby, so I expected her to return shortly. After about an hour, though, her side was still empty. I needed to use the restroom before I went to sleep, so I made one last trip down the hall. The building was unusually quiet. There weren't a lot of regular sounds of chatty backpackers, the clinking of glasses, or music that would normally leak through the halls. There was nothing. It was hushed, like a church after a congregation has left. I found myself practically tiptoeing back. My room was at the near end of the hall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the corridor was darker than before. The few working lights were blinking as they struggled to stay lit, and it reminded me of a funhouse. A tightness began to fill my stomach, and I subconsciously quickened my steps. There wasn't a soul behind me, yet I kept glancing back over my shoulder, convinced I'd see someone gaining momentum on me. The only sound was the soft thud of my flip-flops as they struck my soles. I was flooded with relief as I flung open my door, but it didn't last long. Everything was exactly as I left it, except for that silky nightgown, which was now back on my bed. Sleep came in fits and starts. I left the lamp on for a while, still convinced my roommate would be back, but the shadows it cast made the room even spookier. It was too dark with the light off. I'd finally slipped into a deep sleep when I suddenly heard the door open. A man stood in the darkened doorway, the hall light behind him showing just enough for me to see his contorted face. "I didn't mean to," he sobbed. "You have to help me." Too confused and disoriented to be scared, I sat up, scrubbed my eyes, and reached for the lamp switch. But once the room was lit, I saw that the door was closed. There was no man. I quickly bounded off the bed and went for the door. It was locked. Nobody could have entered it without a key, and the hallway? Empty. I passed the rest of the night fully clothed, sitting up in bed, and with the light on. Though I paid for 2 more nights, at 7 a.m. I gathered all my stuff and went down to the reception desk to check out. "By the way," I said to the 20-something receptionist, "my roommate never returned. I'm a little concerned." She picked up the room key, looked at it hard, frowned, and then glanced at her computer. "What room were you in again?" When I repeated it to her, she looked back at her screen. "Ma'am, that room's been empty for 3 weeks, and it's been clean since then. We only have 6 people in the whole building." The hostel has since been renovated and is now a luxury hotel. I realized that we didn't physically meet, but I thought it relevant since I seemed to have met someone. Someone entered and left my room. This happened to me back in 2013. I was 18 at the time. I was a healthy, normal woman by all accounts and lived in a suburb of South Florida. Just at that juncture in my life, I was moving up north to U of F, which is in Gainesville. Aside from the university, it's a very boring town. Mostly nothing up there. I had noticed that before moving there, and during my time there, once a month, always on the same night, I think the first Sunday of every month actually, I wouldn't be able to sleep. Without fail, I couldn't sleep and I would toss and turn all night. Sometimes after those nights, I would wake up with something strange on my body. Once, on my lower spine, right on the cord, I woke with a large red bump, perfectly centered. It wasn't itchy like a bug bite, and it was unlike a pimple. Another time, I awoke with a scar across my lower abdomen. It was long and unlike a scratch. It was brown, like a cauterized scar. But it left my body within a day or two like a scratch might have. On one such Sunday, my boyfriend happened to be spending the night. It was my parents' rule that he would sleep in a separate bedroom, but before he went off to his room, he laid next to me in my bed for a little while we talked. He was saying something when suddenly he went quiet and looked behind him. I asked what was the matter, but he shrugged it off. He went to his room and we both tried to sleep. However, like usual on these nights, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. A feeling of dread prevented me from sleeping. I got restless and decided to go sleep in the room with my boyfriend, hoping I might be able to relax with him there. But still I couldn't sleep, nearly dozing off only to wake in a fright, which was so uncharacteristic. I gave up and went back to my own room until I suddenly gave in and fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I told my boyfriend that I couldn't sleep all night. I felt like something was coming to get me. He told me, at that moment, the previous night when he had suddenly fell silent mid-conversation, he thought he saw something outside of my window. He said for whatever reason, the first thing that came to his mind was aliens, and it froze him in fear. He also told me that shortly after I had returned to my room in the middle of the night, he was disturbed by a loud static noise and felt vibrations in the air. After a few months, those routine once-a-month sleepless nights stopped and never returned. I still don't know what it was all about, or if it was even anything at all, but that night put us both on edge. My boyfriend and I had been planning a camping trip in Canton, Oklahoma for October 27th and 28th of 2018. We got to our campsite late in the afternoon and started to set up like usual. Unload the truck, set up the tent, set up our chairs around the fire pit ring, and pile the firewood up. I was really excited for the fire later because we had brought a huge log that had one of those holes through the center and soaked with some sort of long burning solution. We got all of our comfy stuff tossed in the tent. We set up our lights and speaker, hung out around the fire ring, listened to music, and talked until the sun went down. Then, my boyfriend started a fire with the single giant log I was so excited about. As we were sitting in front of the fire, the sun completely down at this point, the speakers started to mess up. It was a weird, loud, glitchy static that happened several times, which I had never heard it do before. We figured that maybe it was because the internet was spotty, or maybe the speaker was too far from the phone it was connected to. So my boyfriend went to check it out on more than one occasion and couldn't figure out what the problem might be, because we only had okay cell service. It started to creep me out, and maybe him as well, but he never said a thing even if it did. To change it up, we decided to just leave it alone and ignore the glitchy static and go open the Fritos and bean dip we brought and crack some glow sticks at the table. This is where everything ended. I dipped 1 to 2 Fritos in the bean dip, opened a pack of glow sticks, and sitting across from me at the picnic table, my boyfriend opened one of the glow stick packs that you make into glasses. He put the connector piece in his nose like it was an oxygen tube. I remember it so clearly. I remember laughing really hard and saying, "Oh my God, get those out of your nose." And the very next thing I remember was waking up in the tent. I was in a sleeping bag, nearly all the way zipped up, and my boyfriend next to me asking if I'd unzip the sleeping bag and share it with him because he was freezing. And then, that's when we both sort of snapped out of a sleepy daze and looked at each other so unbelievably confused, and honestly really scared. So we sat there confused and sort of lost for words. So I said, "What the hell happened? Why are we in here? How? What the fuck?" I didn't know what to say or think, and my boyfriend looked just as confused and scared. He shook his head in confusion and was all over his face too, just shock and scared. Then he said, "I don't know. I have no idea what the hell happened. I just woke up a few seconds before you. I was just lying here flat on my back, no pillows, blankets, nothing." Which for him is weird because he sleeps with millions of pillows. We sat there and talked through what all we had done and what we remembered. We remember the very exact same moment of him putting the connector on his nose like a breathing tube and laughing our asses off. I was really freaked out and kind of hesitant to leave the tent. I've never in my life felt so confused. So we laid back down and he wrapped his arms around me, and we kept going over what had happened and how it was so weird that it didn't feel like we'd been sleeping on the ground all night. It's pretty typical to wake up from a night in a tent feeling a little achy. So after a while of talking and nothing making sense, I was ready to finally leave the tent. So I start looking around for my jeans and couldn't find them. So I said, "Where the hell are my jeans?" This is not unusual for me to only sleep in a t-shirt, but it didn't explain where they were. And all of a sudden, I had a really scary flash of the night that I could clearly remember. I was sitting at the picnic table while he was squatted in front of me, and I was panicked and crying hard and really scared. I was pulling giant stickers and thorn things from my jeans, and in this memory, my boyfriend was trying to calm me down and comfort me and saying, "It's okay, babe. You gotta grab them just like this." This very clear memory was like a slap in the face. It had to have been no more than a 15-second memory. So I tried to explain what just came to me to my boyfriend, and he said, "I don't remember that at all. Maybe it was a dream?" It made me a little irritated because it was so clear, and I knew for sure that it had happened. So he said he'd run out to the truck to grab my bag with the clothes in it. I looked out of the tent door flap and saw my shoes side by side set there, nice, not flung, to the side like I normally would do. But when I looked at my shoes, my right shoe's laces were covered in those giant thorn sticker things. So I yelled, "Babe, it did happen. It wasn't a dream." And I said again exactly what he said in my memory, and it came back to him too. He remembered exactly and clearly. When he came back to the tent, he had already looked even more freaked out and said, "Your jeans were folded nicely on your seat in the truck. You really need to come out here." So I got dressed and stepped out of the tent, and the first thing I noticed is everything was left exactly the same as I remembered it on the picnic table. There was a single Frito in the bean dip, The pile of glow sticks I never broke, still in place, and the pack my boyfriend opened with the little plastic connector piece he had put in his nose right on the table with the other parts. All of our firewood was burned. We had a lot of wood. It was really silent that morning. We walked to the bathroom, and in doing so, we noticed again that all of the surrounding lawns were beautifully manicured. So, where did the stickers come from? What the hell happened? How is this even possible? One thing my boyfriend noticed that was not normal for him was that he had no pain when he woke up. He was an 82nd Airborne Infantry paratrooper and wakes up with leg and back pain daily. So I guess that's the silver lining. Were we abducted? Running from something? Why can't we remember anything? We both believe in alien life, but aren't sure if this is what we think it is. Thoughts? I've always been so afraid of the dark, and even more so now, and I will never tent camp again. Neither of us have had any other memories come back to us, and I almost wonder if it's better that way. I'm not looking for answers, I just thought I'd finally share this here. My boyfriend and I were backpacking through rural Tasmania a few years ago. While on a bus, we were discussing our plans for the next 2 weeks. The girl in the seat in front of us turns around and offers us a place to stay in her town. We declined as we were headed somewhere else first, but she gave us her mobile number and said that she and her partner would love to have us. A few days later, we decided to take them up on their offer. I call her and she says they're happy to host us. So far, so good. They meet us at the train station and immediately something feels off. It's really difficult to explain, but it's that primal feeling you get in your guts that tells you that something isn't right. We ignored our guts and followed them instead. They lead us straight out of town. We ask them where we're going, and they say that they live on the outskirts, in the woods. This town is creepy as fuck. It's an old mining town that had been largely abandoned, and as we walk the 15-odd minutes to their home, the houses get shittier, sparser, with boarded-up windows, overgrown gardens, and no people in sight. Eventually, we reach the house at the very end of the town, and it's their house. We go in. Set up in the middle of the living room is a single mattress with a sheet hanging around it. They show us around the house, except for one door which always stayed closed. When I asked what was behind it, they pretended not to hear me. Our room has a made bed, chest of drawers, and looks like a normal room. It seems weird that they sleep on mattresses in the living room when they have a guest room. We go back into the living room and look around. Knives. Lots and lots of knives. My boyfriend asks if they go hunting. No. The partner hands one of the knives to my boyfriend and asks him to open it. It's a massive fucking Bowie knife and what looks like blood stained around the edges of the blade. My boyfriend laughs awkwardly and sets it down. They have a tattoo gun, quote-unquote, to practice. My boyfriend asks if they have any tattoos. No. There's a small axe at the door. I ask if they collect wood. No. Suddenly, the guy says he wants to go to the shops. We quickly agree because we're creeped out and want to get back into the town. The four of us leave and they start walking in the opposite direction of the town. I say that the town is back the other way. The guy says this way would be more interesting because it goes up through the trees. He says that they have never been up to the mountain before, but he knows the area and it would take the same amount of time. I tell my boyfriend that I'm freaking out, but he thinks it's okay, so we follow them into the trees. The path goes up into the mountain, and now we're going in the total opposite direction of the town. The girl turns around to her partner and whispers, "So where was the place again?" My boyfriend and I freeze. I say I want to take the road back to town and start walking. When the four of us arrive in the one shop in town, no one recognizes the couple, and this is a really small town. We make an excuse that we want to go look at the sights and that we'll catch up with them later, and instead book a hotel room and freak out. I did some snooping in the area, and their house had an extra room behind the mystery door and a basement. The path that we were taking led straight out of town and up into the mountain. There was no way it could loop back into town. So yeah, pretty sure we were narrowly avoided being murdered. Or maybe they were just massive weirdos. To be honest, the creepiest thing was the fact that there was no drug paraphernalia at all. The state of the house and the weird behavior would have been understandable if they were intoxicated, but that wasn't the case. In Auburn, Alabama in 2008. It was Halloween and we Googled haunted houses. I can't remember what the website looked like or if there even was one, but it was like a 45-minute drive away. I know that it wasn't like a big attraction, and we figured it was someone's land and would be like a local deal. We drive out there at like 10 p.m. This was before iPhones and GPS, so we had MapQuest directions printed out. We ended up going down a pretty country road for a while with no streetlights, then turned down a legit dirt road that went through the woods. It was pitch black at this point. We went down that road for like 10 minutes and finally saw an old house with a sign by the driveway that was handwritten and said, "Haunted House." No other cars or lights or people anywhere. We pulled in the driveway and sat there for a second like, alright, this is already sort of fucked up. We should just leave. All of a sudden, an old pickup truck turned on about 15 feet in front of us, facing us, light shining down in our faces. It started driving towards us, and we backed out and peeled out immediately. It followed us, like almost bumping our rear end, right on our tail down this pitch black dirt road in the middle of the Alabama woods. We were flipping our shit at this point. It was like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre or the Hills Have Eyes stuff. He stayed on our tail, blinding us and almost bumping us all the way back home until we got off our exit and finally let us go. We have no idea who was driving. I always think what would have happened if we got out of the car when we were in that driveway. I was probably about 14 or so on a camping trip with my scout troop out in the middle of nowhere. We literally hiked into the woods for about 40 miles and set up camp. No phones, no way of contacting the outside, just us and some of our parents fishing and hiking. Anyways, second night into the trip, my dad, myself, and 2 other parents are sitting around the campfire, talking and getting into the subject of UFOs. We start talking about different stories we'd seen on TV shows and such. Right in the middle of a story, my friend's dad points up at the sky and goes, "Holy shit, what's that?" We thought he was joking around for a good minute till he goes, "Seriously, turn around, there's more." We all turn around finally and see 3 massive, and I mean fucking massive, fireballs screaming down from the sky towards the earth. They look like they're going in slow motion, or maybe time just seemed to slow down, but it took forever for them to disappear behind the tree line. Naturally, we all freaked out and started talking about what it could be, but there was no way of actually finding out for at least 3 more days. The hike out of the woods was the worst. Just walking quietly, contemplating what could be waiting, and what the world might be like if our worst fears happened while we were in there. It turns out a Russian satellite had broken up and fallen to Earth that night, and it was seen for miles and miles. It was still the creepiest 3 days of my life. I was in a 7-Eleven, and this guy kept smiling at me across the coffee counter. Okay, no big deal. Happens sometimes. He starts talking to me, says he thinks he knows a friend of mine. Now that I think about it, it was a generic name like Matt or Chris, and I was young and stupid. So I gave him my number and told him to text me sometime. He texted me before I even got home, not even 10 minutes. Something along the lines of, "You're pretty, I can't stop thinking about you, blah blah, we should hang out." So young and stupid me says, "Sure, I have to go to Borders tomorrow, do you want to come along?" After that day, he starts texting me all the time, even if I don't respond. Random things, that could also be, "I want to get to know you" things, so I didn't think anything of it. After a week or so of this, and realizing he was in no way my type, I started blowing him off. I never met up with him again because I felt something was off with this guy. I told him I met someone, and he started being weird as fuck, telling me he's in love with me. He can't stop thinking about me, all this weird and obsessive stuff. I tell him to leave me alone and to stop texting me. He's crazy and can't love me if he doesn't even know me, and that he's freaking me out. A few days later, he texts me that he's sorry and wants to hang out. I tell him I was out and busy, even though I was at home with a friend. He says, "Okay, I'll wait." I'm like, what the fuck? Wait? My friend and I walk through my house to the kitchen, passing the bay window, and I see this guy parked outside my house. I never told him where I lived, never told him my last name, and even so, the house is under my mother's name, which is completely different than mine. I tell my friend, and she tells me to text him and say something along the lines of, "My friend is at my house. Are you parked in front of it? You're creeping her out. Leave now." He tells me okay, he's leaving, and that he's sorry. We watch from the window as the dude backs up my dead-end street until he's blocked by trees, parks and just sits there. I text him again. "Really? She watched you. She can still see you. Leave or I'm calling the cops." He backs to the end of my street and starts telling me, "It's a public street. There's nothing you can do. Just talk to me." We stayed in the house and called a bunch of guy friends. I texted Creepo and told him if he won't leave, our friends will make him leave. He finally goes, but keeps texting me every day. Finally, my current fiancé, at the time we had just started dating, tells him if he doesn't stop, he'll beat the crap out of him. I block his number, and he stops. A few months later, he starts texting me from a new number. He ended up changing his number 4 times throughout all of this to get around me blocking him. "I still love you." Another weird stuff out of nowhere. I don't respond, and he stops. A few months after that, I'm pregnant, and my fiancé and I had been engaged for 6 months. He pops up out of nowhere, and I go ballistic. I call the cops, I let them know everything, and I file a report. I inform the creep of all of this and tell him if he ever contacts me again, I will take it as a threat against me and my son and my family, and he will regret it. My fiancé then takes his number and threatens him as well. It's almost been 2 years now with no contact. Thank God. When I was 15 years old, I started attending a rather prestigious Christian school. Yeah, uniforms and the whole bit. I'd grown up very sheltered, thus I wasn't really used to any kind of male attention, which I got, having developed early, in great quantities. Usually I was either embarrassed or convinced that the guys were playing some kind of joke on me. I didn't believe that I was really all that attractive. Then, one day I found a note on my locker. It was a plain white index card folded over and sealed with a little foil heart sticker. Inside, it simply said, "I think you're beautiful," in careful print. That one got to me. It was very, very different from what I was used to. Basically leering, dirty comments are prepositions. That was sweet, innocent, and touching. I wondered who had sent it, but I didn't really have any way of finding out. So I stuck it in one of my notebooks and began to daydream about who might be my secret admirer. Was it the cute boy who gave me a pencil in my homeroom? Maybe it was my lab partner, who I found utterly adorable, even though he was a few years older than I was. I was a ditzy, moony-eyed teenage girl dreaming of puppy love and maybe my first kiss. I took the note out whenever I was sad or upset, and it always made me smile, but weeks had passed and I had no idea at all who had left it. I began to worry that maybe it really wasn't for me at all. Maybe someone had just put it in the wrong locker by mistake. I was feeling down on myself and a little silly when I opened my locker one morning, and behold, another note. Same little white index card, folded over and sealed with the same little foil heart. Trembling with excitement and anticipation, I carefully peeled one lobe of the heart up and read the following words. "You are so lovely." Like any dopey kid would, I held the note to my chest, sighing, with a dumb grin on my face. 2 notes? It was no accident. Someone really liked me. Wow. I made a dumb little scrapbook thing and tucked the notes inside. I also began trying again in earnest to discern the identity of my secret admirer. But with only 2 unsigned notes as clues, I didn't get very far. I knew that whomever left these notes had to go to my school, that was obvious, but I didn't know much else. Maybe my admirer wasn't a guy at all. Damn, I didn't like mysteries I couldn't solve. During this time, I had been building a friendship with a classmate. We'll call him Mark. Mark was a sophomore, and I was a senior, but we had AP Latin together. We shared a free period as well, and sometimes hung out in the library, as we were both avid readers. Mark wasn't exactly my type, if a 15-year-old can be said to even have one, but he was sweet, and we had many common interests. As we spent more time together, I started thinking that the notes were from him. Then one day, he confessed to liking me, and I had my answer. Or so I thought. Mark told me how he felt over stale fundraising donuts eaten on the back of the wall behind the gym. I laughed, getting powdered sugar all over my stupid vest. Why the big charade? I asked. Why didn't you just tell me to begin with instead of leaving those mysterious notes? Mark's face fell. What notes? I didn't send you any notes. The mystery continues. But now I had a co-conspirator. Another week, another note. I think about you always. Aw. Mark was starting to exhibit some signs of jealousy, which I brushed off. After all, we didn't know who the mystery note sender was. Time went on and I started losing focus in class. My grades didn't slip or anything. I made up for it, but as a normally attentive student, there was a clear shift in my attention. I went from listening intently to a talk on Greek mythology to being called on, not knowing the answer because I was too busy staring off into the distance and imagining my secret admirer as some sort of tuxedo mask-like figure who would someday reveal himself and give me a rose and a dashing smile. The next note said, "You smell like love itself." Huh. I didn't really know how to take that one. I smelled like a combination of L'Oreal Kids cherry shampoo and cotton candy body fantasies. But if that was what love smelled like, then okay. The next note said, "I want to touch you." Okay, that's a little creepy, but maybe in some kind of sweet way, right? Mark was freaked out and said I should go to the authorities, or at least the headmistress. I was dead set against that. I might scare away my admirer, if not get him or her in trouble. I didn't want to do that, so I tucked the note away with the others and waited for the next one. I spent the night at a friend's house at some point. Typical teenage stuff. We watched stupid movies, gossiped about everything, ate junk food, and played with makeup. It was a great time, though by then I had begun to realize that I was a better fit with the boys. When I left the following morning, something caught my eye and stopped my heart. On my friend's mailbox, shimmering innocently in the 10 a.m. light, was a foil heart. Okay, now I was officially freaked out. I ran back inside and told my friend and her mother. Both of them seemed to think I was on something or overreacting. It was, after all, February. Heart stickers were everywhere. That one might have been there for a while and I just hadn't noticed it. I ended up dropping it, but inside I was still afraid. Monday morning, another note. I want to taste you. Okay, this wasn't cool anymore, not at all, but I didn't know what to do. I talked about it to Mark, who convinced me to approach the school's very own safety officer, who proceeded to laugh at me. Kid, if I went after every hormone-addled guy with a crush who didn't have the balls to admit it, I'd be here forever. Yeah, okay. I stole one of my father's pocket knives and began carrying it around with me, for protection. I stopped going to my usual after-school activities and hurried for my bus as soon as the bell rang. I always took the seat closest to the door in class, so I could see if anyone looked in, or looked suspicious as they passed by. And I found more heart stickers. It felt like they were everywhere I looked. I started having panic attacks whenever I saw them. On the window of my mother's car, on the table I sat at lunch, on the door at the girls' room after I left. Mark wanted me to go to the real cops, but I couldn't make myself do it, not after the way safety guy had treated me. I didn't want to be laughed at again. It's a major issue for me not to be taken seriously, so I did nothing. I suffered in silence. Until one day I came home and got the mail, just like always, only this time, mixed in with the catalogs and bills was a plain white envelope sealed with one of those goddamn evil foil hearts. Inside it were pictures, horrible pictures. Pictures of a grown man in various states of undress, doing things to himself. And a note. I bet your blood tastes like chocolate. I started screaming, which got my mother's attention. She called the police, who came out to the house and took a report. Luckily, I recognized the man in the photos, and there were more than enough evidence to arrest the slimeball. He was the school janitor. This is a throwaway for various reasons. I used to play Counter-Strike 1.6 a lot as an influential female admin in a large gaming community. In a way, I helped kids and girls get along with hormone-driven boys and would stick up for my girls if needed, handle abusive kid admins, all that jazz. The way the community was run was that there were regular admins who could buy admin status off a website, and hire admins like myself who would regulate them. There was a new admin who was a young guy, and he heard my voice and server policing others and sent me a message to say hi. Friendly enough, I thought. After a while, he starts messaging me asking for my first name. I tell him I don't give out personal information online. He then states he's going to call me Melissa until I do. He only talked about himself and how great he was, and how he was going to be a teacher. He even showed me his Facebook, having a real girlfriend already, and wanted me to be his mistress. After trying to be polite for a while, being his direct superior, I finally snapped and told him to stop trying to force his feelings onto me and that his advances were unwanted. And if that he continued, I would contact his girlfriend and show her the screens of his conversations. He then turned 180 and called me a disgusting girl and vile. Funny, considering I could remove all his admin rights. A short while later, some of the girls in the community came to me with complaints about his behavior. No surprise there, he was doing the same shit again, but with 17-year-old girls this time. One of the girls asked if we should bait him and bust him for being a pedo, and I casually told her jokingly, "Only if you want to." I didn't think much of it, but he was rather busy for the next week or so and not harassing anyone, so I thought the storm had passed. Nope. He was busy courting and trying to seduce this 17-year-old girl who was going to ruin him. He was messaging her every day to the point she had to lie about going to the hospital to get a break. She Googled a nude picture similar to her and gave him one of those to get a flurry of dick pictures back. He started telling her he wanted her to move to his state that was 1,500 miles away and have her be his secret girlfriend until she turned 18 so he could marry her. Mind you, this guy wanted to be an elementary school teacher. So, she's finally had enough. She takes all of the pictures he sent her with entire nudes, including his face and groin, and makes a compiled picture with all of the nudes and his profile picture from Facebook, and posts it online. A few friends from the community also sent the image to his boss, the superintendent, and other emails to ruin him. I heard someone tried to send one to his girlfriend as well. This guy was hated in the community, not only for being an arrogant guy who thought his shit didn't stink because he was a teacher, but also because he creeped on younger girls and hacked blatantly. So I log in one day and there's a shit storm of everyone either laughing his life is ruined or screaming and pointing fingers that it was cruel and evil to do so. Much of the blame was pointed at me for even approving the idea. I had no idea she would actually go so far, and even she felt bad after all the aftermath. He was fired the next day, and had to work at a Salvation Army from then on. Someone in the community linked with the Teachers Association sent an email to them too, so his teacher career was ruined. You would think after all of this, he would try to cut off all contact and try to better and improve his life. Nope. He stalks me and a few other girls down who were involved and sends death threats through spams of texts and calls screaming he's gonna find me and drive off of a cliff with me in the car. So, we were all evil and vile women for baiting him and ruining his life for no reason at all. He called the girl who he had sent the pics to and tried to tell her that he was going to send her to jail for it, and it was her fault. She replied and said, "I didn't send the dick pics, you did, and good luck trying to get me in jail for getting you fired rightfully when I'm underage." Since then, no one has heard from him, and I hope he stays offline for good. This was a small town in a relatively rural area. A few years after the fact, I'm now relatively certain it was a skinwalker. About 10 years ago, I was at my dad's house for the weekend in Kentucky. The Appalachian people are very superstitious, hailing from the Scots-Irish people and just never losing that side of them. My dad wasn't superstitious, I thought, and was not one to be easily scared. It was about, 10 at night, and we randomly decided to go into town to get some McDonald's. Daddy always insisted on walking in front of me, and I always assumed it was so I wouldn't accidentally step on a snake. But now I don't think that's the case. So he turned on the porch light and opened the screen door. He had put one foot on the porch, and there was this god-awful sound. I will never forget it in my life. There was a screech followed by the sound of a crow, but it wasn't a crow. The best way I can describe it is if it was a person mimicking a crow call. My hair stood up on the back of my neck, and my dad retreated into the house. He slammed the big door and locked it, something I had never seen him do. Before I could ask a question, he said, "It isn't safe. We can go tomorrow morning." And so we did, but the rest of the night we stayed inside. My dad didn't even go outside to smoke a cigarette. He even let the outside dogs stay inside the house. We never talked about that again, but that was one of the scariest moments of my life. When I was younger, I went elk hunting with my uncle and some of his friends, and had an experience I'll never forget. One of the days, I went on a hunt with his buddy Tyler. Tyler gets an elk down about 30 minutes before dark. We get over to it, and as we are cleaning it, we started hearing wolves howl in the distance, slowly getting closer. Every minute that passes, the smell of death gets thicker, the sky gets darker, and the wolves get closer. At this point, it's dark now. All I can see is what's directly in the beam of my mini mag light and Tyler's hat bill light as he works on the elk as fast as he can while I keep watch on the wolves. We're surrounded. I don't know how many wolves there were, but it felt like dozens. It was probably only a few, but I could hear them running circles around us and yelping back and forth to each other. Occasionally, I caught the sight of them in the light, and then they were gone again. Every once in a while, one would get brave and dart in within a few feet and try snagging a piece of the elk. Finally, the elk is cleaned, and we have the scent circle around the carcass to keep it somewhat safe. Now all that was left was a 3-mile hike back to camp, completely covered in blood and being trailed by wolves. By far the most horrifying experience of my life. In southwest Georgia, in the dense hardwoods around 8 miles out of the town of Attapulgis, I had a pretty disturbing encounter. I was around 16 years old, about 5 years ago, and my dad and I went hunting. We always climbed different trees anywhere from 1 mile to 4 miles apart. We did this so that maybe if we startled any deer, they'd wander towards the other hunter. Anyway, as I was climbing the tree with my tree lounge, I heard something below me, about 30 yards out. It sounded like twigs cracking, so I stopped and looked behind me just to see the dense woods. I figured it was just a small critter, like a squirrel or something. About half an hour later, I'm settled in my tree, and the sun is starting to peek through the leaves. It's no longer in the twilight of dawn, and it's now becoming morning. As I'm sitting in my comfy stand, I notice a palmetto bush. Normally this isn't anything odd, but the fact that I noticed it threw me off. Why did I notice it? I sat and stared and couldn't figure out what it was that caught my eye. A palmetto bush looks like the top of a palm tree that sits on the ground, and has a few sort of hairs and tails that stick up and produce some pretty tasty berries. Well, I couldn't figure it out, so I kept scanning the area. A couple hours passed, and I keep noticing this damn bush. Why? Why is it so spectacular all of a sudden? It's a damn bush, damn it. A normal palmetto bush. Whatever. I kept on hunting for those deer. Around 11 p.m., my pa rings me on the pager. Says he wants to walk to what we call the honey hole, a good hunting location full of deer around this time. It has a little stream, plenty of cover for them, and plenty of sneaky passages for us. Okay, Pa, I'll meet you there. As I begin packing up, I notice the twigs snapping again. It came from that damn bush. So I look, and I figured out what it was that stood out so much. There was a man staring at me through the bush. He had a scraggly-ass beard, a tan coat, and some jumper suit pants on. He had a hood up that was the color of the bush. Not only that, he had covered his face in mud, a common hunting camouflage technique. Noticing this, I grabbed my Remington and pointed towards the ground near the man. As soon as I did this, he let out a terrifying cackle and darted towards the direction of the creek, around 150 yards away from my tree. I watched him through my scope, and I could hear him and see him cackling the whole way. And the scariest part? He leapt across the creek about 9 feet wide, in a single fucking jump. I wasn't as scared as I was disturbed. I had a rifle, a damn good one too, 6-round capacity, bolt action. I've never missed a shot on any animal with my rifle, so I felt safe and confident in my skills and equipment. But even then, it was strange as hell. The land was a public hunting club's land, which is why I didn't shoot him. I got down and continued to the honey hole, where I told Pa about the situation. Anyhow, we kept hunting the location in the future after the incident, and I never saw him again. I told the club about him, and nobody had heard anything like it. But about 3 months later, he was spotted by someone else who was also using the tree climber stands. They said they had been hunting a specific hunting site in a certain tree for a couple days at a time. One morning at dawn, they climbed into the tree, and after getting settled in, they saw something eye level out their corner of their eye. When they looked, it was the same description of the man I saw, but he was in an adjacent tree hanging upside down like a sloth, staring at them. If you really think about this is about 20 feet up. When they spotted him and threatened to shoot him, he cackled and climbed down the tree very quickly in a matter of a few seconds. He dashed off into the planted pines behind the guy, and that was the last that they had heard of the weirdo. So yeah, long story, but disturbing as hell. I was out on the coast in the Pacific Northwest. You drive west through the mountains, hit the coast, and drive Highway 101, and it has just the most gorgeous collection of habitats. You can be on sea cliffs, or near tidal pools, or in the coastal pines with ferns the size of small cars, or areas that get swallowed up by the Pacific that have little microbiomes inside the felled trees, and you can see the natural battle for high ground. Areas in which ferns and fungi are more prevalent than any animal. Emerald groves dotted with little emmett mushrooms, these little ruby and gold nuggets standing out against the reddish-brown pine needles. For the most part, out here you're safe. Being keenly aware of your surroundings should keep you from disappearing, and using a walking stick will save you from a broken leg or a fall, all of which are very real dangers. There's big cats and bear and elk and moose, but so long as you're not stupid and you stay aware, you're gonna be okay. But every now and then, a new large cat warning sign goes up for a few weeks. A no new poaching sign appears for a while, etc. If you travel through enough of it, you'll find the meth labs and hobo huts, and those really are the most dangerous animals you're going to run into. It's early in the season, and I'm on this spit, which by December is just nailed by waves and disappears into storms. Part of it was engineered for this, and the main path has little hills on the left and right sides, so the whole path is effectively a massive game trail that's always the first thing to flood. The wildlife chill at the very open-end area at the sea, and every now and again a cat will chase a deer up and make a kill, then drag it off to the sides. You'll sometimes see marks of a struggle, but more often just remains off path. The sea and I are very familiar with each other here, but just this one night, man. It was getting dark and I'm at the open wildlife area thinking how I gotta get back to the car. I checked my flashlights, but I had burned through them 12 to 16 hours earlier in the pre-dawn hours. I check the comforting rhythmic lights of the two landmark and triangulate where I am and tuck that away. I put the lights away, and I figure if I can't find my way back in the dark, then I don't belong out there at this hour ever again. I'm slowly walking back, keeping a steady and committed pace, but not running or making myself a prey target. But something just wasn't right. I text my wife and let her know I'm okay, just a little freaked out, but I'll be back at my car when signal returns in 60 minutes. The faint glow of my cell was the last light I'd see. Something was wrong. I felt like I was being followed, but thought my nerves got the better of me. I heard some snapping twigs and rustling, and all the wildlife waking up or going to sleep. All of this was normal, until it wasn't. I thought I'd heard whispers, but knew it was just the whispers of the wind over the water and splash on the rocks and animals going to sleep. I reached for my phone and realized I'd have no signal and it would just give me away, so I get back to it. I get maybe 20 feet and there it is again. I didn't see any bear or elk or anything, and if it was a large cat, I'd never heard or see it coming. If it was a deer, it'd be stumbly-bumbly loud, but then I hear a snap. More like a thunk, and this was no tiny twig, so whatever it wasn't small. I keep thinking, it's a person. It's a person. Someone has seen me out here, and either wants my gear and cash, or to kill me. I make it in the final half-mile stretch, and by now I'm sure I would have been attacked if it was an animal. I see the faint not nature parking lot in the sanked moonlight, and could hit it with my light if it worked. I spin around thinking, fuck it, I can bolt because it's definitely a person or people, and I'm better off defending myself than I am just being attacked. I break out my phone and shine it down this looming corridor of coast, the trees flanking the path, hugging the light, and kind of holding it in. Nothing. I let out a sigh of relief. Snap. Again, but behind me now. So whatever it was made its way around to me. It's close. A deer takes off in the sedge, and I hear more and more snaps and shuffling and branches catching on jackets, and it hits me, and I put two and two together. They're trying to get me before I can get to the car. This thought goes through my head, and I worry it's the last thought I'll ever have. I move off the path one would anticipate and try to skirt around the whole situation because, hey, maybe it's just me freaking out, man. I cut through the sedge and wild berries and get some distance and cut back through the main trailhead parking lot. I had seen no people all morning or day or evening, which was odd because there's half a dozen cars and I would have seen at least one of them, right? I get to the car and fumble my keys to get in, fire the thing up before my ass hits the seat and rip the fuck out of there. Behind me, and the light cast by the small restrooms in soft moonlight, are 7 or 8 males. Some are still running at the car but slowing down as I put distance between us. I saw the faint soft silvery glint of blades in some of their hands, and one machete, and the rest had sticks or other blunt types of objects. I don't know what the fuck they wanted, but they wanted it really bad. I've been hiking out there for years, and I won't be going back.